Hello there, welcome, and allow me to introduce arrays. So arrays, what can I tell you about arrays? I can tell you a lot about arrays. In particular, what I want to do in this module is extend on the general idea that we want to write programs sometimes or often where we're dealing with a lot of the same kind of a thing. And that we want ways to do that more efficiently and more effectively. And one of the big things that we often wish that we could do is we wish that we could store all of the things that we're working with in one place and kind of work with them all at the same time. And that, my friends, is what arrays are for. So let's go over here. What I want to do is I want to start with an example program as per usual. Let's go look at actually at what it looks like. So it looks like this. I'm calling it an aquarium. It's you know, they're round fish, they're pink round fish, and they're swimming around, as you can see, moving around a bit randomly. You probably can think of how that's being done, and we'll see in a moment anyway. They bump up against the sides of the canvas, and they live their little fishy lives for as long as we allow them to. And this is what I want to kind of work with. And so let's review the code for this just quickly so that we understand what we're looking at. So in my program, I've got 4 fish variables corresponding to the 4 definitely fish that you can see on the canvas there. I create each of those fish in my setup by using a createFish function that's going to return an object that represents the fish. And I provide each one with a random X position and a random Y position. I do that 4 times, once for each of the fish. The createFish function, just so that we look at it, it does probably what you would expect by now, which is it creates an object, puts it at the X and Y position specified in the parameters here, gives it a size of 50, velocities set to 0, so it's not moving when it gets going. That's maybe an odd decision, but it's like you just put it in the aquarium and it's like trying to work out what on earth is going on. And they have a speed of 2, just because they do. Clearly I could make various of these things other parameters here, but I'm trying to keep it simple. So that creates the fish, and then in draw I have my 4 moving functions each time. Well, sorry, function calls. So each time we call move fish, we give it one of the fish, and it moves, and we call it display fish, and it displays the corresponding fish. So we do that 4 times once for each fish. What does move fish look like? It's a little bit sophisticated, if I may say so myself. We use this idea that we can generate a random number between 0 and 1, put it into a variable called change, and this is going to be whether or not the fish is going to change its mind and change direction. So if the random number is less than 0.05, we're going to change direction randomly by setting its velocity to a random number between negative of its speed and positive of its speed, which means it can move in any x direction at any speed. And remember that this 0.05 represents the idea that there's a 5% chance that this change of direction will happen. That's what allows them to change direction, not every single frame jiggling around, but rather just every now and then, so you get this kind of more fish-like kind of idea of what they're up to. Once we've set their velocity, or potentially set their velocity, we change their position by adding their velocities to their position. Makes sense? And just to get that aquarium feeling, I'm constraining their positions to be within the canvas. So the X position is constrained to be between 0 and the width, and the Y is constrained to be between 0 and the height. That way, as you've been seeing, when they hit the edges of the canvas, they just kind of stay there and bump up against it, just like real life round fish do, in case you didn't know. Okay, how do we display them? We draw an ellipse. Oh dear, there's a missing pop. How embarrassing. We push, we fill, we know that round fish are pink, so we make them pink for authenticity, and then we have no stroke because that's classy, and we draw an ellipse at the position specified for the fish that we're dealing with in this function, which is passed as a parameter. Okay, and we end up with a nice working program that is super great, except what's wrong with this program? Well, it's repetition, right? Repetition, it's not like repetition is the ultimate enemy, and that it's going to be the next coming of Satan or something, but repetition is not great. And we can see repetition here, got 4 separate fish variables. Now that makes sense because, they are 4 separate fish, but it would be way better if they could all be stored kind of together since they're all kind of the same thing. Correspondingly, we've got 4 creation instructions where we create a fish and store it in a variable. We've got 4 move fish instructions, and we've got 4 display fish instructions. There's nothing, it's not a disaster, but again, if I wanted 10 fish or 100 fish, 1,000 fish, 4,000 fish, this is not going to be tenable, right? Because I don't want to be doing that much and copying and pasting, and my program is going to look ridiculous. Okay, so that would not be nice. Even though we've got amazing functions here, we just use the same function over and over, we are using it over and over, and this is the kind of thing that a computer should be taking care of for us, a programming language. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, you might have been able to guess from the title of this, what was it called again? What was it called? Introducing arrays? Oh, you know what? Arrays are the solution here. So what is an array? It's another kind of thing that we can create in JavaScript. It's another kind of value that we can store in variables and so on. And what it does is it allows us to store multiple values in one variable. Okay? Now, we know that JavaScript objects do that as well, where they separate out an object into various properties. But arrays are different, and in particular, the big difference is that they don't have property names. They just have slots with numbers. So they have each value is stored in an array at a numbered address, so it actually starts at 0 and then goes 1, 2, 3. Each one of those is an address that stores one thing, one value, and importantly, as you can maybe tell from those numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, it stores them in order. And we'll look at this as we go along. So let's use an array, and let's take it step by step. So let's begin at the top. That's always a classic place to begin. So I said that it was kind of annoying that we had to have 4 separate fish variables because they're all the same kind of thing, and maybe we would store them in one place. We could store them in an object with properties fish1, fish2, fish3, fish4, but that's already seeming kind of pointless, right? It's just repeating the same idea. What I want is a way to store them in the same variable without having to do this kind of repetitive work. And the way that I do that is obviously with an array. I'm going to call my array school because that is the collective noun for fish, a school of fish. And what do I put in here? Well, at the beginning, just like with these fish variables, I don't have anything to put in. So what I need to do is create an empty array. So I'm going to use square brackets. Not out of some kind of choice, but because that is what happens. So an empty array looks like this. An empty array is something with nothing in it, but normally speaking, an array is like a series of boxes, each one of which is storing something inside of it, right? And each one of those boxes has an address, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So it kind of makes sense that an empty array looks like an empty box. You could put it that way. These square brackets, this is the calling card of the array. So empty square brackets means create an empty array, and we're storing it inside of our school variable. Okay? Now, that's done. That's all that we need. So this is the only variable that we're going to need in this program because it's going to store all of the fish inside of it. So how do we change these lines here that are creating my fish so that instead of creating individual variables, we are using the school array? Well, I already said that the different boxes inside an array have numbers, right? So what I want to be able to do is I want to say which box to put each fish in. So the first one is going to be in the school array, so I'm going to write the variable with the array in it. Hopefully that makes sense because I need to say which array to put this fish into. And I'm going to give the address to put it in by using square brackets. And I'm going to say put it in box number 0. That's the first box because we start counting from 0. So school 0, the box with the address 0, is going to get this created fish inside of it. You may be able to complete the blanks yourself now. The next one is going to go into the box with address 1. The next one is going to go into the box with the address 2. And the next one is going to go into the box with the address 3. So we are writing the variable that's got the array in it, so we know which array we're talking about. And then we write square brackets to say which address we're going to put it at, and then the address of that box. 0, then 1, then 2, then 3. Okay? So now each of these fish is in a separate box in the array. One of the nice things maybe about arrays is that we started out with the school array being empty, no boxes, But just by saying I want to put something in box 0 of the array, that box is created for us by JavaScript. So it's kind of like we will it into existence. We could have a discussion about whether or not that's a good thing. We'll look at another way of doing this towards the end of the video. But for right now, we've got each fish in a separate box. The 0 box, the 1 box, the 2 box, and the 3 box. Having just talked about addresses and boxes, let me just quickly make some notes on terminology here, because those aren't the terms that programmers actually use. These addresses that I've been talking about, 0, 1, 2, and 3, those are called indexes in programming. So this is index 0, index 1, index 2, and index 3. These are the indexes of my array. They function like addresses. The values that we're putting in to the array at these indexes, i.e. the fish that I've created and put into index 0, those are called elements. So we talk about the element at index 0. We're talking about the fish that's in that space of the array. Okay? That's just terminology. Terminology is not the most important thing in the world. It's just good to know. Again, because you'll probably read people talking about it on the giant internet, where people talk about everything, including arrays, and where people have opinions about everything, including arrays. So let's continue on with this, this integration. So we've successfully updated setup. Now, if I'm moving fish, I no longer have a fish1 variable. So how do I talk about the fish that used to be fish1 that is now in the first element at index 0 of my array? I do the same thing that I just did. So the school array is where it is, and it's at index 0. The address of that one is 0. So I say move the fish that's in the school array at index 0, the 0 position. And then I just do the same thing here, right? School 1. Oh, and if I'd been smart, I could have done this kind of thing. School 2, not 3, and school 3. It's always very slightly confusing, potentially, as you're beginning with this kind of thing, that we start counting from 0. So you keep thinking, well, there's 4 things in the array, but we end up with 3 here. But you do get used to that. Okay. So we move the fish at index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3, and we do the same thing to display. So that's a lot of changes that we've made. We should make sure that nothing has been utterly destroyed since I was last looking at the program. And indeed, the round fish continue to swim, and that is a very, very good thing. So we've improved our program, but not as much as we might have dreamed, right? The fish is still swimming, so we've still got a working program. But we haven't actually reduced anything. Like, we're still calling display fish 4 times explicitly here, move fish 4 times explicitly here. We're still creating 4 fish on 4 lines. Really, the only improvement we've made, at least in terms of the size of our program, is that we don't have 4 fish declarations. At the top, we've just got this one school variable that we're using, starting it with an empty array. So that's not a big win. There's still a big conceptual win here, in the sense that we now are thinking about storing all of our fish in the same place. I think that that's a good thing all of its own. But really the big win with arrays is yet to come. And so let's look at this. And let's look at where we create our fish. So here's school 0, and here's school 1, and school 2, and school 3. What does that remind you of? We've got school 0, 1, 2, and 3. It's counting up, right, in lots of 1, starting at 0. Now, what is something that you might remember from your past that does that? What counts? What do we use for counting in a program? We use a for loop. So let's use a for loop. How do we write a for loop? Well, we dredge it from our memories and we write for, open parentheses. Traditionally speaking, we start with a variable called I that is assigned 0 at the beginning. This tradition is very much in keeping with how we use arrays. So notice that I starts at 0. The first thing I want to create has the index of 0. So I would start at the correct index to create my first fish at. How do we end our loop? How many times through? Well, we want to create 4 different fish. So one way I could say is less than or equal to, is less than or equal to 3, right? Because I want to keep counting 0, 1, 2, and 3. So less than or equal to 3. But in reality, the way that everybody writes this is less than 4. That kind of makes sense because I want to create 4 fish, so it makes this look a little bit more readable, right? You start at 0, and I want to keep going until I've got 4 fish, which will be while I is less than 4. And I want to keep making I go up each time. So the first time through I is 0, then it's 1, then it's 2, then it's 3. That maps exactly to 0, 1, 2, and 3. So let's use that. Rather than create something at school 0, what is the thing that I'm going to use that's going to count from 0 up to 3? It's I. That is all that we need. For let I is assigned 0, start at 0, so the first time through I is 0, we're going to create something in index 0, then keep going while I is less than 4, so then it's going to become 1, we create a random fish at position 1, then we create a random fish at position 2, and then at position 3, then I becomes 4, this is false, and we carry on. So this loop, I'm just going to delete that comment for now, is going to go through and it's going to create our 4 fish for us. And it is much, much more condensed, much more efficient as a way of doing this. And we'll see the benefits of this build up over time. Okay, so we've used a loop to create our fish. Can we do the same thing down here? Yeah, we can, because again, we're doing that same thing. We're saying school 0, school 1, school 2, school 3. So let's do exactly the same thing. For let I is assigned 0, I is less than 4, I plus plus, move fish. Which fish do I want to move? Well, I want to move a fish in the school array at index I. It's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, and then it's going to move all of my fish. Now I don't need those anymore. Same thing for the displaying. Let I is assigned 0, I is less than 4, I plus plus, display a fish. Which fish? The one at position I each time through the loop, 0, 1, 2, and 3. I have made my draw loop so much better it's not funny. Does it still work? It still works. It's still the same thing. It's still my aquarium. So again, we haven't changed the program, we haven't changed what it does, we've changed how it's written. And sometimes that is really, really important, not just because it's not because it's shorter, it's because it makes other things more possible. And we'll look at that in a second. You may be saying, why don't you just do display fish up here in the first loop, since these loops are identical, they all just count through all of the fish. And indeed, we can do that. And I'm happy to do that right now. So for every single index, 0, 1, 2, and 3, move the fish at in that element and display the fish. Just a word of warning, because it might not be totally obvious, this won't always work, because, sorry, what am I talking about here? Because it may be the case that sometimes you write programs where you want to move all of the fish before you display all of the fish. There's just situations where that might come up. Maybe in moving one of the fish, something happens that means that you don't want to display the fish, in which case we would separate them out. But this is fine. So for every fish, move it and display it. Our program is greatly improved. Carrying on. Let's go back up here. We should notice something about this for loop that's not so good. What is it? Can you see it? It's this 4. This is a hard-coded number that we don't want to include here. This 4 represents the number of fish that are in my array. So why don't we make a variable called, school size, and I'll set that to 4 instead. And now I can replace this 4 with school size. That just looks better, and it makes this loop make more sense. It's saying count from 0 up to the school size. It's generally better if in your program you don't see those precise numbers, right? You see ideas, like the idea of how many fish there are in the school. So we might think then that we would go and do the same thing here. We could replace it with school size, like that. And that would work because it has 4 in it and there are 4 fish. But there's a slightly better thing that we can do than that. And we can rely on the fact that the school array, and every array, has a property. It has a property just in the way that JavaScript objects have properties. And the property that it has that's useful here is called length. The length property of an array knows how many things are in that array. So in this instance, school.length is 4. The great thing about the length property is it stays up to date. So if there were at some point 5 fish in my school, then it would be 5, and if there were 1,000, it would be 1,000. And importantly, it stays up to date while my program is running. So after you've created an array where you need to use some kind of like set number here, right? Because the array doesn't have a length at this point because we're creating it. After that, when you're running through an array, you should always use the length property. It's always the right thing to do. Even if in your program you never change the length of the array, so you could just use that school size variable, you should always use the length property. Have I emphasized that enough? I think I have, okay? And the big reason for this is that in a moment I'm going to want to add fish into the aquarium while the program is running, and so I'm going to need this to stay up to date, okay? So again, still works for fish. We set school size to 4, we then use school size to create our array, which means that it creates 4, and then we use school.length to do stuff in our array, and that also stays up to date with 4. However, this 4 is arbitrary, right? At this point, it's not like there's 4 lines of code anywhere to do something to each fish, so it doesn't have to be 4. It could be 10, and then we're going to create 10 fish in this array, because we're just going to count up to 10 now. And because 10 is now the length of the array, we're going to move 10 fish and display 10 fish. And indeed, there are 10 fish in my program. This is a much more populated aquarium. And there is not really a limit on this. 100 fish. Just change it to 100. Now there's 100 fish, starting to look like a simulation of blood flow. 500 fish. That's quite a few fish. They're wiggling around. It's starting to look more like an abstract thing. 1,000 fish. Can barely see anything. There's so many fish cluttering up my aquarium. There's not healthy conditions whatsoever for those fish. So it doesn't matter what number I put in there, because I'm using an array, for one thing, which can store arbitrary numbers of elements, and because I'm using these for loops to deal with my array, both for creating the elements and for moving and displaying them, I can display, and I can work with as many fish or as few fish as I want. If I set 0, now this is no fish. The program didn't break. There's just no fish there. Or I can have 1 fish. Lonely, lonely 1 fish. So sad. So this is terribly sad, I think we can all agree. This 1 lonely fish. So what if I wanted to add a fish now? Like what if I wanted to be able to click in the aquarium and it would drop a fish at that position and it could keep this poor, sad, weeping roundfish company? How would we do that? Well, to do that, we need to be able to add a fish into the array, right? And that's all that we need to be able to do, because our amazing for loops are going to account for as many fish as are there because we use the length property. So if I added a new fish into the school, this for loop would just, add it in, and it would still move it and display it because we're using school.length. So if I'm going to click to do this, I'm going to need a mouse pressed function. And I'm going to need to create a fish that I want to add to my array. So let's use create fish to do that. Now I don't want to put it in a random place. I want to put it where the mouse is, because that's sort of nice. Create fish, mouse X, mouse Y. Now how do I get it into the array? Well, there are different ways of doing this. One thing that I could do is just work out where the sort of the highest addressed element, the highest index is, and I could put the fish in the next index. That would work fine. But a much better way of doing this is to know that there is a function that arrays can use called push. It's related to this kind of push here, but it is different, and it is specific to an array. So what we can say is school, which is the array, dot push. So it's a function that's part of this school array. And the function, we give it what we want to add to our array. In this case, that's the fish that I just created, right? So school dot push fish. So the push function is going to take whichever thing we give it here, and it's going to put it inside this school array. And where is it going to put it? It's going to put it at the end of the array. So if we have 4 things at 0, 1, 2, and 3, for instance, it's going to put it at position 4, index 4. Currently in our simulation we have only 1 thing, so that's at index 0. So the first time I click, this school.push is going to add this new fish at position 1, index 1. And that's it. That's literally all that we have to do, if you can believe it. So every time I click the mouse, a new fish will be created and it will be added to the array. Click. Look at it go, and it swims around because, again, move fish and display fish are being called on every element in the array. And I can add as many of these as I want. Click, click, clickety, click, clickety, click, click. Clearly, this could be more exciting depending on what I do and move fish and display fish and create fish. But I mean, even the simple simulation is pretty good, my friends. Not bad at all. So we can be very, very happy with this, I think. This is a great moment in programming. You should sit back and savor it, maybe have a cup of coffee or something. When you come back, I have one more thing that I would like to point out. This idea of pushing a fish pushing anything into or onto an array is useful up here too, in the create fish function. Sorry, in the creation process here. So previously we've been doing our loop with I, and we've been assigning to the ith element, the element at index I. We could do the same idea, but we could instead do the same thing. We could create a fish in a variable, edit the random position, just like last time, random 0 height, oh, typo. And then we could do the same thing, school.push fish, push fish, push fish. So that's the same idea. It works in the same way. I think there's just, given that what we really care about is just looping through this school size times, there's a niceness about just using push. So it's just like add one, add one, add one, add one each time through the loop. And the outcome is the same, right? So that was just 1, but if we created 10, then there's 10. Okay? So that ends my kind of discussion of this. There's a lot going on there. It's very powerful. But the basic message is that we can use arrays to store multiple values in order. We may or may not care about the order, but they are in order. As many as we want. And we call those things that we're putting into our array elements. There's a series of elements in an array, and they have addresses that we call indexes. Starts at 0. So index 1 is the first element in an array, and index 1 is the second element in an array, and so forth. And we've seen very clearly that arrays work extremely well hand in hand with for loops, which are perfect at counting from 0 up to some number, which allows us to do things with every element in an array, such as create them or move them or display them. And this allows us to write programs that deal with large numbers or dynamic numbers of elements, all of which have similar behaviors. Maybe they're the same kind of object, and that lets us write programs that are potentially very interesting indeed. Here endeth the lesson. I hope that you feel that you've been introduced to arrays, and I hope that you're excited because they are an exciting part of programming. See you next time.